On today's show, we sit down with Jordan Pascasio, the co-founder, VP of Product at Fansure. We sit down and talk a little bit about his TRNDS Sports app and what it's doing for the industry.
This is crazy. This is crazy. This is crazy.
Everywhere you turn, it's the same old sports talk, the same headlines, the same news, and the same boring information. This podcast is here to change all of that. We bring you hot sports takes, winning sports betting strategy and picks, reliable gaming industry news, and breaking interviews with some of the biggest names in sports business. My name is Ryan Knup, and welcome to the Knup Sports Show. All right, welcome back to another episode of the Knup Sports Show. I'm your host, Ryan Knup, here with you each and every time. Today, we have another special guest with us. We have Jordan Pascasio with us, the co-founder, VP of Product at Fansure. Jordan, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, man. Thanks for having me. Really excited to be on today.
Yeah, I'm super excited to chat with you on the show here. I know we talked several months back, and I really love what you have going on and some of the things in the mobile app space and now with Fansure that you have going on. And we're going to get into everything that you're doing. But first of all, man, how are you hanging there with this COVID outbreak? And, you know, we keep thinking we're getting past it, and then it kind of spikes back up and we're questioning it again. How are you dealing in business and in life with the COVID pandemic?
Doing all right. You know, as expected. It's definitely a little bit unnerving to see the recent uptick, and especially what's going on over in Europe. Excuse me. And they're usually, I think, when I think back to earlier this year, they've been the precedent in terms of how things might materialize here in the U.S. So the fact that they're enforcing some lockdowns in select countries already, and couple that with the large amount of daily cases here in the U.S., it's certainly a little bit nerve-wracking, especially as it relates to how that's going to affect the NFL season and perhaps the return of the NBA season and the NHL. So, yeah, it's definitely something to monitor. I think personally, I'm doing okay, just given the fact that everyone is on a remote basis right now. I had a unique opportunity to move temporarily out of LA, which is where I'm typically based, and my girlfriend and I are actually spending some time in Hawaii, just getting away from it all, just again because we're able to work remotely. So I kind of got a sweetheart deal down here on a little unit near the beach, so we're just working on the island. So it's been good in that sense. It takes the stress away from COVID.
Oh my gosh, I would say you're making me jealous already. I mean, come on, Hawaii, that's such a beautiful area. I spent some time there last year and really enjoyed it. And like you, kind of was able to work remote. And what better place to work? I mean, such a great climate there in Hawaii. What, just off topic, but what island are you on? Where are you at over there?
Sure, I'm in Oahu, in a town
great.
called Kailua, so it's on the east side of the island. So yeah, it's been great. It's a little tricky with timing, and I have some engineers that live on the East Coast, so been waking up at weird hours of the night. But yeah, it's definitely doable and been great.
A little different pace there in Hawaii than there is in LA, right?
Certainly, yeah.
Pace of life is definitely
Yeah,
a
well,
little more relaxed.
it's interesting because I after college I had spent almost 6 years in New York City and then moved to LA, and then obviously now I'm in Hawaii. So you think about that regression of pace from city to city there. It's been pretty interesting.
Sure. That's amazing. That's amazing. So let's hear a little bit more about yourself, you yourself. So, you know, you're co-founder of TRNDS Sports, now co-founder and VP of product at Fansure. So definitely in the sports betting, you know, and that type of space. I want to hear a little bit about your background and just, you know, before we get into the products, how you got started in this space and kind of what brought you to where you are today.
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to run through the background quickly here. So I went to Villanova post-graduation. I worked in New York City. I worked in investment banking for almost 6 years. I sat on what's called a debt capital markets desk. So I did a lot of advisory and structuring for Fortune 500 companies who are looking to raise capital. And, at the end of that 6-year tenure, I just made the decision that that's not what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. It was a great foundation and afforded me a good life, but I didn't want to be a managing director and take that whole path and not have explored other options of things that I may be passionate about outside of that line of work, right? So I had an interest in being closer to the value origination of a company. You know, when you work at a bank, you're very much a cog in the system, especially in the early years. And I was really interested as a result in looking at early venture and tech. And I was dating someone at the time in LA, still dating that person. But at the time we were doing long distance. She lived in LA, and I just happened to also discover that LA had this burgeoning tech scene, and there was a lot of opportunity to get in on the ground floor at some new startups within that ecosystem. So I explored that a little bit, and then just kind of made the jump, right? So I moved to LA without a job in hand, but I knew there was a lot of opportunity there. And then within a couple of months of landing in LA, per se, I was able to get a job doing financial strategy at a clean tech startup. And I did that for about a year, and it was great, man. I mean, it's talk about a change going from a global investment bank to a company of less than 100 people was pretty wild and sobering, if you will. And but at the same time, it really cemented my interest in being at that stage of a company and understanding how startups operate and connecting the dots between different business verticals, product sales, engineering, et cetera. So that really opened my eyes opened my eyes to like how these startups operate. And then at the same time, I liked it so much that I was like, hey, I should start a side project and work on something that I'm passionate about, because I think it would be really good to build out my product management chops. And at that time, it was 2018. The federal legalization had just happened in terms of sports betting, and I had always been a huge fantasy player and just sports fan in general, growing up playing sports, playing fantasy sports, all things sports, right? And I really started to gain an interest into looking into sports betting. And just given my background, it was always this combination of like, sports fandom plus analytics and analyzing player performance and team performance and stuff like that to kind of predicate my decisions and my bets. And the problem that I was trying to solve at the time was just, back testing and being able to make that process easier, right? It was really hard for me to go out and figure out, how did the Celtics perform as a road dog over the last 10 games? It was, figuring out how to learn SDQL, if you're familiar with that product, or, manually scraping this data by yourself and keeping your own proprietary Excel sheets and stuff like that. So I wanted to build a better solution around that. I was interested in building a mobile experience where within a few taps, anyone can be able to access this type of data. So more data transparency for team-based trends. And that's basically what I set out to do. So I don't mean to abridge this story too much, but I had created a roadmap, pitched it to a few folks, happened to get an early win by getting into Sport Radar's accelerator program. And then from there, it was off to the races. We had the data, teamed up with a few folks to build the product, and we're out in fall of 2019 with a iOS application that allowed users to very quickly uncover team-based trends, right? And then from there into the winter, we released NBA functionality. We're seeing good engagement in the app, and we started to snowball and get traction and interest and stuff like that, right? And this carried through the NBA season all the way in January, February, and then March. And then that's around the time that we started looking to do our first fundraise. So we're looking to do a pre-seed round, and using some of the traction that we had garnered over the past couple of months to help kind of bolster our pitch and our vision and things of that nature. And then, of course, I think it was like March 13th or March 15th. I remember I was streaming a game, watching the Mavs game, when the whole Rudy Gobert incident occurred, and subsequently sports shut down. And as you can imagine, that immediately threw some cold water on our fundraising process. So at that time, things were looking pretty daunting for us in terms of the future of the company. So I'll take a pause there. I know I just laid out a ton of information for you.
Yeah, that's an incredible story. I mean, thank you so much for sharing all of that. I mean, that's I love success stories like that where you have a vision and you take action on it, and breaks have to happen along the way in any entrepreneurial journey like that. But just the fact that you were able to take a step and jump and and kind of take a passion and run with it really sits well with me. Like that, I love that part about your story and what you're doing, and also the sports data space. I mean, me personally, that's one of my passions as well, that maybe I've never really acted on it fully. And so I just completely love everything about what you're doing. So I'm curious to hear more now. So I know TRNDS Sports, it was a great app. It was going, but I'm curious to hear the next progression that kind of got you to where you are today with Fansure.
Yeah, happy to talk about that. So I guess I can continue on this story arc. So we were trying to figure out what's the next step for this company. So we basically, here was the situation that we were facing at the time. So this was back in March and April. Is we had no more sports, and we had no foreseeable future or date when sports were going to return, right? So as a result, we then had no users, because if there's no sports, no one's really looking up any type of analytics or insights to base any type of bet on sports, right? So it was tough. I mean, the uncertainty was killer. I mean, you saw it was obviously across all flavors of investing, whether it's early venture or even institutional investing. I mean, even the stock market at the time was incredibly volatile. So it was tough to paint a clear path forward, and for me, it was tough because I'm thinking about, okay, I just left this career in finance and then went into tech and early venture, and then started my own thing. Essentially went a whole year on basically nothing, trying to build out this dream, and we finally started to get some good traction, and then COVID hit, and my options were, do I just try to wait it out? Do I continue to wait until the fall when maybe sports will come back, or do I just stop, dissolve the company and go back and get a corporate job? Like, there's all these different questions running through my head and trying to figure out what's the best for this product, what's the best for my career, what's the best for my personal life. So a ton of considerations to think about as it relates to that time. And ultimately, like, I just wasn't ready to give up. I believed in the product that we were building. I believed in the problem that we we're solving, at least on the consumer level at this time. So I tried to figure out creative ways to keep it alive, right? So I was just talking to different people in the space, founders, advisors, investors, et cetera, just trying to get advice, essentially. And it was interesting. I had known another founder in the space. We shared a technical partner at one time, and this founder had started a company that was in the ticketing space, specifically ticketing protection. So they were offering protection to fans if you were to buy tickets to go see, let's say, a Clippers game, and let's say that Kawhi Leonard sat out due to load management. They would insure that event just so that you're not paying for an experience that is kind of diluted from what you expected upon purchase, right? And it's a cool idea, and they had a lot of great advisors behind them. Amino Hassan, Marcellus Wiley. It was a great team. They were actually made up of some ex-NASA data scientists that all came together and wanted to build this ticket protection product. And think about my product was certainly affected by COVID, as everyone else in the sporting space, the sports tech space. But think about someone who's in a ticketing space. Let's look at today, for example. Sports are back, but for the most part, fans and seats are still not a thing, right? So their business model was really, really affected in a terrible way. And they had this great technical team, and they just wanted to try to apply their talent to an adjacent market, because they really had something going with the team that they had assembled. So naturally, when you think about adjacent markets, when they're already doing kind of predictive analysis around injuries and load management and stuff like that, is they looked at the gambling space. So they're looking at sports analytics, DFS analytics, stuff like that. And he had just called me and wanted to pick my brain on the best way to enter the space. So we went on to have like an hour conversation. We're chatting about different ideas, blue sky ideas, more low-hanging fruit ideas. And then at the end of the call, it just went really well. And we went our separate ways. And then the next day he called me and I was like, hey, I really loved that call yesterday. I had this thought kind of circling in my head, and I wanted to get it out to you. What would your thoughts be in terms of just us acquiring you guys, getting access to your IP and using that to essentially accelerate our entry into the sports gambling space? And it was, I mean, at first I was just like, I didn't know how to react to it, because, you know, when you start something and put blood, sweat, and tears into something, you don't you don't want to give it up so soon, in terms of, you know, not being the sole visionary anymore. But then at the same time, I took some time to chew on it and just strategically think through, like, is this the best path forward for me to continue to pursue what I've built out in my vision? And at the end of the day, I decided it was. I mean, there wasn't anything else probabilistic, elsewhere. I mean, it was just, it was either I go and get a corporate job, or I continue working on this product via this acquisition. So, I really liked that team. I spent another week or two just chatting with those guys, getting to know every single one of their team members. And I got, started to get comfortable with the move, and essentially, we made the decision to do a business combination, which was great.
Yeah, that's amazing. I'll interrupt there, but I mean, that's amazing. Congrats on that, first of all. I mean, so young of a product, and to be able to be acquired. I mean, obviously they saw something good in you and in the product there. So that's pretty cool. And I appreciate you sharing such detail of your story. You went into detail, and I think a lot of people listening probably can relate to at least pieces of your story, right? I mean, if you're an entrepreneur in this space, I'm sure you can relate to some pieces of Jordan's story here. So, let's move beyond the story now. Let's talk a little bit more about the products that you have going on. Let's talk a little bit deeper about, I guess, where you're going, how you see these being used within the betting and DFS industries, and maybe some future talk about what you have going on.
Yeah, sure. No, I appreciate the kind words too. It wasn't, it wasn't the easiest process, but again, it gave us a chance to keep fighting on. So,
Sure.
In terms of products, yeah. So the original product was the consumer product. So it was the mobile application, mobile backtesting tool, if you will, that allows users to, for better or worse, create their own systems and understand and analyze certain historical profitability for teams across various angles. And it was interesting because the first version of the product was, it was shitty. I mean, it was, when I first validated this product, right? You think about from the very beginning in the origins, I had set up my own database, so like living locally on my device. It was just in a SQL database, and
Mm-hmm.
I had just had a huge text group with my friends, right? And I just said, hey, any trend you guys want, just throw it in this group, and I'm just going to run it for you locally and send it back to this text group. So I had a bunch of buddies, there's about 20 people in this text group, just every night asking for, hey, how are the Thunder against the spread after a loss, or how are the Falcons as road dogs? And it just kept coming and coming. And that request traffic got to a point where it was like, okay, it's validated enough in my mind that I want to, build this out. So when we built it into this mobile experience, like, our whole goal was to help drive conviction, for bettors on or off of a bet, and making that transparency, or access to data, like, much easier, right? So no more, trying to teach yourself SQL or SDQL or anything else. It was just a few taps, get your data. And it was interesting because when we first launched, and what we very quickly found out is that it only really resonated with a certain niche group of bettors, right? It's those bettors that are already aware of the scenarios that are in play, and then go in and they want to, look at different variations of systems. But for the common bettor, like, the common bettor A isn't astute enough for the full slate of games every night to know, like, hey, the Celtics are on the road and they're coming off a loss, and I'm going to take that knowledge and then build it into a system. Like, no. Like, we saw that through the KPIs that we tracked, right? And we were looking at weekly active users or daily active users, and only a portion of those active users, whether it be weekly or daily, were actually running searches. So we're like, what are they doing if they're not running searches in the application? And B, how do we create a better experience to make searching or discovery easier? So that's what we worked on all over the summer. We built essentially a search recommendation algorithm that's going to basically find the most contextually relevant trends for each week. So if you're going into this week 8 in the NFL, and you go into the app, instead of requiring you to build the system yourself, it's going to give you a long list of suggestions for hot or cold trends, because we've already determined where those are, and it's up to the user to kind of look at those, analyze them, or tweak them as they see fit. So it's making that discovery process a lot easier. No more, building the system yourself. And it's interesting because as we built that over the summer as a new feature in the consumer app, we had this thought, because we built this algorithm to extract these trends, right? It's like back testing thousands and thousands of scenarios every day. And we're like, why don't we apply this to potentially like a B2B product? And it began as an experiment, right? So we had this really hacky, simple product where every day we just use that algorithm to output all of the, we call it our trend score, which is this algorithm that's going to rank every single trend that's relevant for that day's slate of games. And we would just output it into a CSV, and we're shopping it around, right? So any type of sports betting media companies that may have use cases for this data, whether it's for like content injection for long form content, podcast videos, etc., we would just try to market this product to them and say, hey, every day we'll send you this CSV, and you can basically filter it and find all the data you want to put into your content. And again, it sounds super hacky, right? It's like an email digest with a CSV, but we started to get traction even on that product from some pretty big names. And it was cool because we started seeing some of our data being used in articles and platforms that I had just previously used as a better fan before. So it was cool to see. And then that gave us a little bit more validation to say, okay, let's build this, let's look into this B2B space a little bit more. So we started with these team trends that were being outputted into a CSV. And then the next step was, okay, let's think about player prop trends, right? Because it's an emerging market, right? In the US, it's becoming more and more liquid, especially for the big name players and the big name kind of stat category. So pass yards, rush yards, pass TDs, more and more people like these markets. It's a little bit more relatable for the new bettors coming into the space that came from fantasy. It's less daunting than thinking about, okay, what about taking sides or totals. It's just like, okay, let's look at player props, because that's pretty relatable to what I was doing before when I played fantasy, right? So we saw a lot of opportunity in the prop space in terms of addressable market, and we said, okay, let's take the same framework that we do with the teams and use it for player prop lines, right? So we're looking at certain players, ingesting different lines from different operators, and basically are able to say, Matt, for example, Matt Ryan in his last 5 games has exceeded his passing yards prop line in prime time or something like that, right? So we're able to extract the same trends, but then relate it to player prop trends and their ability to cover lines. And so we did the same thing with the team stuff. So we built that functionality, outputting it to CSV, and again, got some interesting traction. And where we are now is we're closing in on a partnership with a large data provider that will help us, that will provide us distribution, right? So I'm not really at liberty to speak to the deal until we actually finalize it and sign on the dotted line, but we're certainly very excited about it. And what's going to happen now is our insights are going to be available and integratable at scale through APIs. So that's kind of the next step for the company, and it's an interesting step, right? Because we now enter this land of, we have this traction in B2B, we've had existing traction in B2C, and with all the new features that we released this year in the mobile app, it's the kind of all the engagement and retention and other internal KPIs that we track have been doing really well, but it's like, we're still so young. So we need to make a decision between, okay, do we double down on B2B? Do we double down on B2C? So that's really what we're approaching these next 2 months with in terms of trying to figure out what's the best path forward for our company and what should we kind of go all in on. And it's been interesting. It's been stressful, right? You're managing kind of two different business verticals, but it's also, we try to glean all of the advantages where we can. So for example, the B2C app, we recently launched a player prop insights feature within that app. And we're actually able to use and instrument the app to a point where we can use the insights and the user behavior insights from the app to help refine the algorithm that drives our B2B product, right? So we can understand what type of player prop trends are driving the best engagement or conversion rate and stuff like that, and then use that insight to help refine the way that our algorithm scores the trends that serve the B2B list. So it's helpful in that way, right? But it's just a ton going on. We know we're cognizant of the fact that we need to be able to identify kind of one core competency going forward. So it's been an interesting period, but a fun period to kind of have all these experiments going simultaneously and figure out where's the best traction.
Absolutely. Jordan Pascasio, the VP of Product at Fansure. Jordan, one of the things I took away from your conversation there, just from what you just said, I mean, one of the big things, I'm always listening and trying to get common themes of how entrepreneurs and people operate. And one of the things that I took away from that is you don't always have to have the perfect solution right away. I mean, you mentioned it 2 or 3 times throughout there where you're like, oh, it started as a hack. It was just a hack. It was a spreadsheet. I was sending out this or I was sending out that. And you kind of went down that path of starting as a hack, and it turned into what you have today. And I think so many times in business, people are scared to like do it as a hack, or scared to kind of just try something kind of, if I may say, half-assed, right? They don't want to even try that. They want it to be perfect. And I think sometimes you learn a lot from the hacks, right? You learn what works, what doesn't, and you just get something out there. There's a lot to be said for that. I'm not saying it's always the right solution to do it that way, but I thought that was a cool thing that you guys and you yourself used throughout business to kind of get to where you were today. So props on taking chances and trying some of those hacks.
Yeah, certainly. I think we always try to approach things like that, getting something stood up as hacky and as lean as possible to get to a point of validation or no validation as quickly as possible, because then that's kind of your biggest signal in the beginning. And I think if I were to give advice to myself a year ago or something, it would be to always double down on that process, right? I think in the very, very beginning, even going back to pre-acquisition, I don't think we had done enough validation around problem identification. I think we had actually developed a really cool solution, but we hadn't particularly identified the pertinent problem that it should be applied to. And this is kind of industry agnostic when you're building products, right? It's focus more on validating out the problem that you're solving before you really go all in on building out the solution. And I kind of learned that a little bit the hard way, and the failures along the way, and analyzing metrics that pointed to the fact that, hey, there needs to be a change here, really accelerated that realization. But yeah, I definitely think it's super important to be 150% sure that the problem that you're solving is real, is needs a solution, and then from there go on and build out your solution.
Amazing. So before we get off here, Jordan, like I said, I do appreciate all the time you're giving me here. This is amazing conversation, and it's good to hear. Before we get off here, though, I'm curious. We know this path isn't always easy. We know there's always challenges. We know there's always things you're looking for. Maybe somebody listening to this is out there and can help with a problem that you're having. Give me 1 or 2 problems that you're having, or maybe not problem, maybe that's not the right word, challenges or things that you may be looking for advice or help on, that maybe somebody listening may have an answer for. Anything that stands out in your mind in regards to
that? I mean, anyone that's gone through, making decisions on figuring out the core competency and the path forward for a business that potentially has a couple is interesting. Like I said, we've been straddling between B2C and B2B, and my hunch is that the bigger problem to solve and the bigger opportunity is within B2B and helping by providing kind of contextually relevant information and insights. So, but anyway, it's more so around just the framework of that decision and which signals should I be looking out for. And then I think secondly, just as we get more traction into B2B, this isn't so much a problem, but anyone that's in the space, whether you're a media platform or an application, just as many potential customers, or not customers, but like stakeholders that I can talk to in the industry, just to always better understand the problems that they're facing is always super helpful for me as it relates to what we're doing. I just like to get out and talk to as many customers as possible, or users in this instance. But yeah, anyone who's just interested in chatting and talking about the pain points that they're facing right now is always helpful for me as I think about how to refine our product.
Amazing. On that note, how would they get a hold of you, Jordan? What's the best way to get a hold of you or your company?
Yeah, sure. I think LinkedIn is probably the path of least resistance. Just shooting me a request or a message on there, or my email is just first name at fansure.com. So Jordan, Jordan at fansure.com.
Awesome. Amazing. Well, Jordan, I'll let you go here. Before we go, any last words, any last thoughts, anything in the world of sports you want to talk about? Actually, who is your team? Do you have a team or teams that you're following closely? I know right now we're really only have football going on, but anybody that you would call your team?
Yeah, sure. I grew up outside of Detroit, so I'm almost across the board. I'm a Detroit sports fan.
Oof.
Pistons, Red Wings, Lions. So Lions have always been tough historically. Right? Red Wings were great growing up, but then I was a big baseball player since I was 2-3 years old. So I naturally I grew up in the '90s, so I loved Derek Jeter. So I was a Yankees fan growing up. So that's like my one deviation from Detroit sports is I'm a Yankee fan. So it was tough to see them go down to the Rays this year, but it's okay.
Yeah. What did you think about the baseball season with no fans, basically? I mean, did it affect you as a fan this year or what?
No, not so much. I really enjoyed watching, and the playoffs were great, all the way up until, what was that, 2 days ago that the Dodgers won. So,
yep.
Yeah, no qualms there. I thought they did a pretty good job.
Awesome. Amazing. All right, Jordan, I will let you go. I appreciate all your time here today. Listeners, if anybody wants to get a hold of Jordan, we'll put all those links and we'll put everything we have on him in our show notes so you won't have to remember those. You can get out there. But great story, Jordan. I really appreciate it. And if you need anything from me at all, definitely don't hesitate to reach out. So Jordan Pascasio, co-founder, VP, Trends, Fansure, has it all there. Jordan, thanks again for being here. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Knup Sports Show. If you enjoyed this podcast, please consider subscribing to our iTunes channel today. Plus, visit us at knupsports.com for more picks, previews, strategy, and news. That's knupsports.com.